there's just this idea out there that we all need this minimum level of information, knowledge on this range of subjects, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
Some of us don't need some of the pieces of information, and as soon as we do need them, we can get them if we know how to learn. We can live meaningful lives as children and youth and have these wonderful, powerful experiences and fill those lives up with stories and meaning and wonderful experiences, or we can be focused on box checking. But if you're going to be focused on box checking, you're not going to have those experiences, and at the end, you kind of have an empty box. What will you have? Because none of us are retaining those things that we forced ourselves to learn through that K through 12 system.
What if I told you that a story could teach your child more history, science, math, and literature than a year of textbooks? Welcome to the Story Schooling Podcast. I'm Angel Selden, author of Curiouser.
And I'm Sandy Fouts, co-founder of Wonder While Learning.
Today we have Jennifer Jarrett. Welcome, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
So Jennifer is the mother of 3 children. She's been homeschooling for 22 years, so since her oldest child was born. She started Leadership Education Academy for Families in Snohomish, Washington, and she writes curriculum. We're so excited to hear your wisdom and insight that you've gained over these past 22 years, because it really did start when your daughter was born, right? I mean, it's not like you suddenly started when she was 5 and ready for kindergarten.
Yeah, I feel really lucky that I had those years to learn and acclimate before I felt the stress and pressure of I need to educate my child. I think a lot of families feel a lot of stress and pressure at the thought of homeschooling. And I was really lucky to have my child's whole first years of life to acclimate to that idea and study and learn and get prepared. So I felt completely comfortable homeschooling her and didn't feel that stress of, oh no, what am I going to do? So I think it was when she was about 18 months old that I went to a Thomas Jefferson Education Convention near St. George, Utah. And it was so inspiring. And I heard a teenage girl who had been in a scholar class in her co-op in this leadership education style. And she was talking in front of a crowd of like 1,000 people. And her poise and her enthusiasm for what she had been learning and the description she gave of her experience in class was so inspiring and moving. And I just thought, that is what I want for my little girl who's, 18 months old. How do I get that? And that began my journey into studying leadership education, learning all I could about it. I ended up hosting a series of seminars that Oliver and Rachel DeMille run, the Face-to-Face with Greatness seminars. I started that in California. Then we moved to Washington, where I actually grew up. So I continued the series there and then started like little play groups and things for my daughter. We had a really good routine established. We did like a morning devotional every day, and in that process, I'd begun my own education, my own scholar phase. And I just started with the book list in the back of Thomas Jefferson Education. There was a list of children's classics. And I thought, well, I've read some of these, but not all of them. So I started that list and just started reading them to myself while also doing this daily devotional time with my oldest. She was, just a toddler. And we would read scripture stories and read aloud from picture books and other things. She just grew up in this sea of books and stories and reading. And by the time she was 4, I had started introducing her to chapter books, and she had quite an appetite for them. And I will never forget the day we read Wizard of Oz together. We started reading it, and she was just so entranced with the story and said, "Can we read another chapter, Mom?" And we just kept going and going and going until we had finished the entire book in one day. And I only had one child at that point. We hadn't had our other children yet. And so we could do that. And at the end, she said, "Mom, I want to build a scarecrow. I need a scarecrow." And I was like, okay, and so we looked around the house for what materials we had and went out in the backyard and made a scarecrow. And then I just have this precious video of her, my little 4-year-old girl, talking about the scarecrow and how she decided that he was her pretend friend husband. And she finds this so embarrassing, and I think it's the cutest thing ever.
And what did you decide about your scarecrow?
He's my husband.
He's your husband? Why is he your husband?
Because he needs a wife.
He does.
And I need a pretend friend husband.
You do? You think a 4-year-old needs a pretend husband friend?
Yeah. Because everyone needs a husband, Sort of a casual thing.
It's sort of a casual thing.
and it was just so much fun. And so that's what like school looked like for us. And because of that, like everything I'd studied about leadership education and inspired learning, I wasn't at all worried about teaching her specific academic skills or being on some sort of timetable or schedule. We were just reading and being together and having fun and lots of stories. And then when she was 5, we found our twins. We've adopted all 3 of our children, and we'd been wanting to have more children earlier, but with adoption, you just have no control over the timing. And so when she was 5, we found our twins, and we were living in Washington. They were in Utah. They had been born at 25 weeks, so that's what's called a micro preemie, and they were pretty ill and fragile, and we didn't know what their outcomes would be. But we felt like these are our children. And within like a week's time, we had found out about them, bought a minivan, and drove to Utah in the middle of winter, a week before Christmas. It was a wild, crazy time. And we just took, our 5-year-old with us and packed up all our Christmas things. And we were there in Utah for 3 months. My then husband would commute back and forth between, like, about every couple weeks, he would come back and be with us in Utah and then at home in Seattle working in between. I spent most days at the hospital. Other people took care of my daughter. And then whenever I was with her, we would just read, and that's what we did. And when the twins finally were well enough to leave the hospital and come home, there was these tiny little sick babies, and we just had this sort of forced quarantine period for a really long time. We could not take them out of the house. They were so tiny that if they got a cold, it could be deadly. And so we had to just really limit our contact with other people. And I was also nursing them, which is it was such a blessing for me and also really hard and unusual. There's not a lot of people out there. I don't know very many people who have nursed adopted babies, but then when you combine adopted, micro preemie, and twins, it's a pretty crazy combination. And it meant that I was nursing for 16 hours a day in the beginning. So like that's all I could do. So while I was nursing, I could read to my oldest, who was, 5 and 6 during that time period. And so that's what we did for school. We just we learned this idea, the baby is the lesson. There's a wonderful article written several years ago. I cannot remember the name of the gal. She was really good friends with Oliver and Rachel DeMille, and she wrote this amazing article, The Baby is the Lesson, and that became our mantra. Like, these babies are our lesson. We are learning about family and love and taking care of the most important things, and in between, we're reading books. And so I just read aloud, all day long. We read through Little House on the Prairie, and we had the Wizard of Oz series. She was totally into that, and I have a list on my blog of all the books I read to her when she was, not everyone, but like a bunch of the chapter books she really loved and what age she was when she read them, and that she was just bathed in stories. And then my twins saw all of that too as they became toddlers and crawling around. We had board books for them, and I have so many pictures of them sitting back to back with their little board books while my oldest is actually reading a book, and we just were books and stories everywhere. By the time the twins were 10 months old, we finally thought we could like start emerging from our quarantine and living a normal life. And then I got sick and had brain surgery and was in the hospital for 5 weeks. And so my mother-in-law and my mom, between them, took care of my kids, came and stayed with us and helped us get through that really crazy time. And then when I came home, I was recovering and I had to learn how to walk again and all sorts of things. I couldn't drive. I had double vision, so I wore an eye patch and I looked like a pirate. And I was sleeping like 18 hours a day. So when I was awake, what I was mostly doing was reading again with my kids. And I think by then we had learned to use audiobooks as well, which is so nice when you are physically limited. You're nursing twins or trying to care for a lot of little kids. And so putting on audiobooks is great. So we just continued the lots and lots of stories. And my oldest, she was such a fun child to homeschool and just ate up all of those stories. She had this magical world in her head. She would play outside in the backyard. So she was outside by herself acting out stories and living in this very theatrical world. By the time, let's see, my oldest would have been 11 then, we were starting to have what we would have called scholar-aged youth, and we wanted some scholar classes for them. And I had decided to be the one to teach a Shakespeare class, and I knew really nothing about Shakespeare at that point, but I was interested. And so I started learning about Shakespeare and went to a training and learned how to teach this class and just jumped in. And the second half of the year, you do a production, and we did A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we didn't have enough students in the class to fully fill out all the roles of the play. So my 11-year-old daughter got to be in it, and she was so thrilled and just loved acting and being on stage and being dramatic and theatrical. And that has continued to be in plays in our co-op. And then she actually helped direct some when she was like a senior. She directed one of the plays for our co-op. And she is in college now at the University of Washington, and she is getting a STEM degree, but she still loves theater. A lot of people thought she would go into theater. Like, she did all of the local middle school and high school productions. They had a really great theater program in our area, and she was able to be in all of those productions and had a great time there. We discouraged her from paying someone to teach her something she already knew. We said, go to college and learn something that you need expertise in. You already know theater. That will always be part of your life. You don't need to pay someone to help you with that. And so she is getting a STEM degree, which is one of her other loves, but theater just keeps finding her. She just landed into this perfect little job after school. She teaches theater to elementary and middle school students with this little theater program in the Seattle area. And she gets to write plays and direct them. And she's helped me write some of my curriculum that I sell. After I taught that first Shakespeare class, I've taught that class or variations of it like over a couple decades now, and have written my own version of curriculum called Stories from the Stage. And she helped me write lots of other things for it and has done a lot of artwork for it. And it's just fun to see how these stories have just been like such a background of her life and my other children.
Where did her love of science come from?
I think she just had a real natural love for animals and the natural sciences. I love science. I'm by no means an expert. I really wanted to be a physicist when I went off to college, and then faced the sad reality that I had not grasped math well enough in high school. I had unfortunately thought that I was bad at math when really now I know I just hadn't. When I started trying to do middle school math, I hadn't had that switch in my brain to be able to think abstractly. And so I concluded I was not good at math and just I did it good enough to get good grades and pass, but I didn't really know what I was doing with regard to math. So then when I became a physics major and trained in my first physics class, I was completely overwhelmed by the math and thought, oh no, I can't do this, and had to drop the class. Years later, when I'm homeschooling my own children and understanding all these new ideas about how learning happens and how one can keep learning their whole life, I started studying science again myself, overcame my math issues, and went on to write my own physics curriculum and teach physics to high school students in our co-op, including my daughter. And she loved that physics class. She still talks about experiences she had there and makes references to it. So I think like my enjoying science and having fun with it helped her see how it could be. And then her own natural interests just took off from there, I think, in answer to that question.
Right, right. So, I mean, what a great example you provided by you're interested in something, you felt like you had failed at that before, but then with your new paradigm, you were like, hey, I'm interested in this and I want to learn about it. And so I'm going to develop the skills I need and acquire the knowledge I need to understand it and then be able to share that with others.
Thank you. And I love science for all the lessons it teaches. It's so very different than theater. They're both so valuable, and there's just so much students can learn from both. And it isn't about the content. It's about the learning process and the skills you gain.
Tell us more about what the most important lessons of science are, because in school it is checking boxes. These are the scientific facts they need to understand. And then also how you make it span disciplines and span other areas of their life, regardless of whether or not they are going into a science-related field.
Science is a lot of puzzle solving and asking questions and experimenting and figuring out answers. It's really fun, especially if you approach it like a game. Too often it's approached as a list of check boxes that we have to like check off, and that's just no fun. But for example, in my physics class, the first week of every physics class that I teach, we study the concept of mechanical equilibrium, which is the idea that if something is not moving at all or it's moving at a constant speed, it is in mechanical equilibrium. It's related to Newton's first law of motion. And that concept can be seen in all sorts of ways. And so the way that I help my students start to explore it is by having them build bridges. And if you can build a bridge that holds weight and doesn't move, it is in mechanical equilibrium. And so I give them a bunch of materials from popsicle sticks to ropes to stools to, like, you can make small bridges, cups, little pieces of tiny things. I've had students make bridges out of paper and cups that can hold up like a bunch of pennies. And then one time my students constructed a bridge out of rope and big stools, like bar stools, and they made a bridge strong enough that the tallest student in the class could stand on it, and it supported his weight, and that they felt so proud of themselves. So just from that one experience, they learned so many lessons. They learned about experimenting and trial and error, like the failing, like, oh, it didn't work, is a really, really important part of the process. And to learn that that's a fun part of the process and not something to be afraid of. It just means, okay, we need more. That was information, that was data. Now let's try this and let's keep going. And then when they finally reach that triumphant moment where they've got the biggest kid in the class standing on this platform and it's holding him up, they felt so triumphant. And it took a long wrestle, the whole class period almost, to work on that. And it wouldn't have been any fun if they had just been given instructions for, here are the steps you take and do this and you'll make a bridge. That would have been not nearly as fun. So that was really cool.
Right. It would have had a guaranteed successful
Right.
outcome. But would they have had that triumphant moment if
It
they
wouldn't
had
have
just
meant
followed
anything,
the
yeah.
instructions? Yeah, it wouldn't have meant anything. Yeah,
Mhm.
I love that.
And then they can learn so many lessons from that experience. Just the idea of mechanical equilibrium, you can think of it in a metaphorical sense. Like, when my life is moving in some sort of constant speed or things are stable and not moving, I'm in balance, I'm in mechanical equilibrium. And when I'm not, then what can I do to get back into some sort of equilibrium? And there's other concepts like that. Another concept we study in physics is F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. As we're studying this, one of the things you learn is to get an object moving requires a tremendous amount of force. You start with way more to get it moving. But once it's going, that's one of Newton's laws. It's going to keep going on its own unless something stops it. And in the real world that we live in, there's air resistance and friction of the floor that, like, if you set a ball rolling, friction will slow it down, but very slowly. It will take a long time, and there's very little force required to keep the ball moving. You get it moving, and then little taps will keep it moving for a really long time. And one of my students made the connection that is like making a habit. Creating a habit requires a tremendous amount of energy and effort on our part, but once it's made, it will keep rolling and keep going with very little additional effort. And that was such a cool epiphany that she had and made as she was studying. This girl's not going to become a physicist. That wasn't the point. But she was able to see a real true principle and apply it to her life in a way that is sticking with her and is going to be with her for the rest of her life. And science is one of the ways that God speaks to us. It's one of the languages God uses, I believe, to speak truth to us and teach us things. And it's a really important language to understand. And so studying science is really important. If you really want to know God, well, then science should be one of the ways that you are trying to come to know God. And then the scientific process the method is so useful as a thinking pattern and a framework. That's another reason I think it's really important to teach students science, so they can learn that pattern and way of approaching things and problem solving. It will be useful throughout their life and for any kind of learning that they want to do. We could talk about like the lessons you get from a theater experience, which is totally different, but just as powerful.
So tell us, what are the lessons of the theater?
Yeah, okay. So in my theater class that I do, in the second half of the year, after we spend the first half of the year studying lots of stories, mostly Shakespeare. Every week there's a different play or work that we're studying, and we include like Broadway plays and stage plays and other stories. And they're really studying the stories, and they start to see there's a pattern in these stories, and you see the characteristics of protagonists and villains and side characters. And we have conversations about, like, you want to be the hero in your own story and not just always be a side character, and lots of great conversations about that kind of thing. But then in the second half of the year, we do a production of some kind, usually a Shakespeare play. And putting on a production is a lot of really hard work. It is so much work that oftentimes someone will say, why are we putting ourselves and our kids through this? This is so hard. And that is part of the point. Doing something really, really hard yields amazing benefits and growth that you can't get any other way. So you have these kids trying to memorize a bunch of lines and learn what they mean and come to these regular rehearsals, and they're getting tired. It's stretching their muscles. And then that last week is what's typically known as tech week in the theater world, where you're rehearsing usually every day for lots of hours. It's long, it's tiring, it's difficult, and the opportunity to learn, like, how do I manage my own self and regulate my emotions? Like, if I'm especially like an introvert, that can be extraordinarily difficult to be with people for so many hours a day for a whole week. And learning how to manage that part of themselves is really important. Learning how to work with a group. What do I do on stage when the person across from me misses their line and says it wrong? I have to figure out how to adapt in the moment on stage and respond without, like, it's called breaking forth, and I don't want to let the audience know that something has gone wrong. I have to just stay in character and keep going. And they learn lessons like deodorant is really important, because if not, backstage it gets really stinky and people start complaining. Learning how to work with other people, and that my way isn't the only way. And then again, it's like when those kids build the bridge, but even on a larger scale, after they have done this whole thing and finished the production and performed it for their families and friends, their sense of accomplishment is just tremendous. And they feel so unified. If you want to unify a group of students or a group of people, I can't think of anything that does it better than putting on a production together. Because it's almost like you go through battle together or something, and you win, and you have this wonderful conquering moment, and you've accomplished this thing together. And then you all have this shared language and almost like a whole set of inside jokes from your experience that you share together. I will still hear students quote lines from a play they were in. They see how that line applies to another area of life. It's just part of their background knowledge now, and it's just so fun. So yeah, you can learn so many lessons from being in theater.
When you think of the story arc and the hero's journey, like I hear you guys are putting on, this story, but the whole story that's going on in real time and like real life with the students at the same time, that like hero's journey, and then, the climax of it all, like in that last week, and then the production, and then the denouement, the ending of your story. Like I hear that whole process going on
So
through your
true.
story.
Yes, I love the hero's journey, and you're right. That's why, like, doing a production is your own opportunity to experiment with and have a hero's journey. Same thing with doing a science experiment where you're trying to accomplish something really difficult. There is a form of the hero's journey in that, and that is one of the most powerful things about stories and teaching our kids, like helping them start to see themselves like, I am living out my own story. And if they understand the hero's journey, which they will learn best by studying lots of stories, like reading lots of stories, and then they can start to identify the patterns and then see those patterns in their own lives and decide, who do I want to be in my story? Like, I want to be the victor, the protagonist, the person that does the hard things and overcomes. I don't want to be a side character. I don't want to be an antagonist that's just causing problems. Like, how do I overcome and be the hero in my own story?
These are just great examples of how starting with the whole leads to all of the individual, the bits of information and the skills that you want them to develop. Whereas a conventional approach would be, let's have a class on self-reliance, or a class on working as a team. Like, why don't you just put them in a situation where they have to work as a team? I thought, even what better motivation to do your homework? Like, I have to have my lines memorized by this date, so I'm prepared, so I don't let my teammates down. I'm showing up, instead of traditional homework where you have to have it to me by this date and this will just affect you. You get a good grade or a bad grade. This is, we need you to show up. Everybody's counting on you. I assume they do most of their line memorizing independently at home. Elise was saying in our interview, she said she felt like she was better prepared for college than most of her peers, because most of her peers came from schooling where they were told exactly what to do. They were in class all day, every day. Whereas children who grow up in this type of educational environment, they're driving most of their learning. They need to, by the time they go to college, my children, Sandy's children, your children, at least these other young people that we've interviewed, they have had lots of practice in managing their own time and motivating themselves to do it. So
that
what
is so
great
true.
preparation.
When they're love of learners and core phasers, it should all feel like play. Learning should feel like
Mhm.
play. We don't want to bring them into the ZPD or a zone of proximal development where they start getting stressed out. That's just not appropriate for that age, and it will destroy a love of learning. But once they get to that scholar age, the ZPD is exactly where we want them, and we give them the opportunity to do that with these hard challenges, like being in a high school science class or a theater class. And actually, I think it is better to start with I would do the harder science class later. I would start with the theater class or something like that first, and we use those opportunities to win them over. They are inspired. They are choosing the class, so that's the part they've committed to. They've chosen, yes, I'm going to be part of this class, and we win them over on the idea of doing their homework. And like you said, being part of a group and knowing their peers are counting on them, their work affects not just them but their peers, can be very, very motivating, and they do more and more work, and it's for real reasons, not contrived, arbitrary reasons.
Because you should
And
know this, because you need a grade,
Yeah.
you need to pass the class to check this box so that you can get into college and do what you really want to do. No, this
yeah,
is what they really want to do.
yeah, and it's so much more meaningful. And so they
Yeah.
engage in that process, and then they come out of it learning, oh, wow, I got so much out of that. That was a really valuable experience. They've been on their own hero's journey, and they have come, through it with tools and gifts and rewards and things that they didn't know that they were going to get. And it
Mhm.
becomes very intoxicating and empowering, and they want more. And as they progress, then we can move them into a science class where there isn't going to be a production at the end, but they now know the learning process is fun, and my peers are going to do this class, and I want to do it with them, and I want to be on it. And oh, we're going to build a bridge. Cool, I'm in. Let's do it. And we can ask them to do even harder and harder things, and it's still for real reasons. It's not just so I can check the science box off so I can apply to college.
Oh.
They're engaged for their own real reasons. Their peers are doing this. They want to be part of what's happening, and they've learned to trust their mentor and the process, that I'm going to get really cool stuff out of this. This is going to be a good experience. And even when it's hard, they're developing that ability to keep going through the hard things and not stop and know that it will be worth it. And then they get to the end of the class and they are finished the experience, and they can reflect on it. And I love hearing all the things they have to say afterwards about why it was valuable, and oh, that part was so hard. I hated that part. But man, it was really good to get to this last day of class, or this moment, or like when we finally succeeded at building the bridge. That was so cool. Or we're outside playing with giant bubbles, and do you remember how we made that one bubble that was so huge? Their
Yeah, yeah.
reflections on the experiences they had and what they gained are just so valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue it's all playful too. Even when they enter the zone of proximal development, it's not suddenly drudgery. It's still
Yeah.
mostly playful, but I think that when they get to that point where the way I define it is they're wanting feedback at that point. Whereas
Yeah.
love of learning, they may encounter hard things and they figure it out themselves, but as they get older, it's like, tell me if there's ways I can improve. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Whereas the younger ones, the love of learners, they're not ready for tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Right.
They're still forming that, or core, they're still forming their core. So
Definitely.
I love that. But what you're talking about is working up to pushing themselves in doing harder and you giving them more difficult challenges
Well,
as
because
they get older.
you're right about the play aspect of it. That feels like a challenge, like that feels like play when it's appropriate for them. It's like
Exactly.
a game
Yes.
Yes.
rather than a crushing experience.
Right. And a game is not a game unless there's a challenge to it, unless it's hard. If it were easy, it wouldn't be fun.
Yeah, there have to be stakes. Just like a story is no fun if there's nothing bad that ever happens. Like, I love the Narnia stories, and it's so funny when you really look at how few years of Narnia's history we actually get to read about, because they're only telling us the exciting parts. And there's thousands of years of peace and tranquility, but that doesn't make a
Right.
very good story.
So we're
Right.
just going to pass over the peace and
Yeah.
tranquility part.
Because that's what develops you. And as you're
Right.
talking about these moments as the kids that are going through that, I love being able to take that for my own children and use it later. So when they're up against something that's challenging later, we can reflect back and say, tell me when you've experienced something like this before, because they feel like in that moment and they have like, I can't do this. This is impossible. It's too hard. This isn't worth it. Well, let's think back
Yes.
to another time when you experienced something maybe similar to this and you had those same thoughts. And then they can remember, that they pushed through or what the outcome was. And then that can push
Yeah.
them further by having that point of reflection of their past when they've nailed it before. And you can push that push that bar just a little further each time as they
That is so
grow
true.
and develop.
Yes, I love that.
Yes.
And reminding them of stories you've read. When my kids face something kind of scary, I like to remind them of Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. When Anne Marie, at the end, she is to deliver a basket with
A
something.
handkerchief.
I don't want to spoil it, but in a handkerchief. Yeah, but there's food in it. And then underneath the food, there's a handkerchief with something in it that would be illegal. And she gets stopped by the Nazi soldiers and questioned, and that she had courage in that moment. And she said, well, I wasn't really brave. I just did what I had to do. I knew that I had to do the right thing. And so I did it. And I was scared. So I wasn't brave. And her uncle Henrik says, well, that's exactly what courage is. It's knowing that this is the right thing to do and you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I love that. So true.
And I also thought of, you talked about the piece, like, well, that's not interesting. And it reminded me of The Giver, also by Lois Lowry, which I just finished reading with my son. And it was my probably 6th time reading the book. But, they live in a world where there are no problems and nobody
Right.
gets hurt and nobody experiences pain, but they're also not able to experience joy either. Our most difficult trials yield the greatest joy and the greatest empowerment. Like those trials are what make us stronger.
Yep.
Yes.
Tying it back to what you were saying, these stories, and then hopefully as they get older, personal experiences, like Sandy was saying, give them the strength and inspiration they need to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that reflection is so important. Like being able to see their own life in the context of a story and what part of my story am I at? What am I? They can see the pattern in their own lives and like, oh wow, I'm in a testing moment right now. Okay, how am I gonna approach this? What have I learned from my other stories? What did the heroes do at this moment? And what can I apply to what I'm experiencing right now? As a homeschooler, it's really easy to start with, okay, what's the list of things I need to teach my kids? And we can start coming up with this big list of like, these are all the holes I need to fill. This is all the boxes I need to check. And I need to make sure that my child is educated, whatever that means. And we start to define, what does that mean that a child is educated? Because I'm homeschooling them. So it's my job to do what the public school does. And we have this theoretical idea that the public school fits every child with the same knowledge. And then they go out into the world and everybody's successful. And obviously that's a fairy tale that's not true. Like nobody actually leaves school with all the holes filled and nobody leaves with all of the same information and not everybody is successful and plenty of people are that didn't have all the holes filled. There's nobody, it's impossible. This idea that I can have all the holes filled, whatever that means, is impossible and ludicrous and there's no point in even trying. So then it leaves us, well, what do we do? And what I've learned, what I think is really where we can spend our time and energy on is I want my children to know how to learn. I want them to feel confident in their ability to learn, capable, like know that you can know how to learn, but not know that you can know how to learn. So that confidence is really important. And then I want
So
them to love
trusting
learning.
yourself that they
Yeah.
can trust themselves.
Yeah. So that as they go out into the world, they know they are equipped. They have a toolbox of everything they need to learn whatever they will need that they're going to experience. Because there's also no way I could predict all the kinds of knowledge they're going to need in their life. That's not possible. They have to be able to learn throughout their life if they're going to accomplish any of the things they want to do and live a meaningful life. And that's what I want for them. So I need to teach them how to learn, develop their confidence in that learning, and help them love learning. Because if they love learning and they know how and they feel good at it, they're going to be fine. They'll be able to do everything and more, and they'll learn way more. Like if
They
I'm
will.
obsessed with we got to get these 6 boxes checked, then maybe we'll get some of them checked badly. They won't really care. They won't know very much. And that's it. That's all they'll do. Whereas if I am just focused on teaching them how to learn and falling in love with it, they're going to learn, buckets and buckets of stuff. The list of things that they will learn is going to be you can make a book out of everything that they learn. It's going to be way more than if we're going for some sort of standard. And some kids are going to learn way more about math and science, and others are going to learn way more about literature, and that is fine. If they know how to learn, then at some point when a subject maybe they haven't spent as much time on becomes important, they will be able to get that knowledge and do it themselves.
We have grown up being trained to think in terms of subject matter.
Yeah.
And that's just not how the world is. So actually, I think it doesn't even play out that way. It naturally will span subject matter. When you start with the whole, it just spans subject matter. No one is going to leave home at age 18 and just know a lot about literature. I mean, if they've read a lot of literature, that's good at English. No, it spans subject matter. The more stories you read, the more subject matter you're going to cover in these books.
No, yeah, I totally agree. There's just this idea out there that we all need this minimum level of information, knowledge on this range of subjects, and that's just not true. Like
Yeah.
some of us don't need some of the pieces of information, and as soon as we do need them, we can get them if we know how to learn.
Very, very easily. Right.
Yeah.
When one of my children decided to attend high school all the way through full time, she took biology, and it was just so much useless information that she was going to forget, like transcribing DNA into RNA. She took the final and she said she got an A. And in the class, and she said, "Wow, I can't believe I got an A in the class, and I can't remember anything from that class except for how to transcribe DNA into RNA, because it was the last thing we learned, and I don't even know what that means," is what she said.
I don't know what I'm doing.
She had memorized this formula and then has no context for it. It has no meaning to her. And so why does she care?
Yeah.
Why would you remember it? And she's not going into a biology related field.
Right.
You had just talked about, isn't it so much more powerful to learn a few things about the human body and have it be connected to something meaningful? Like,
Yes.
even after your twins grew older, I'm sure there were continued conversations about their preemiehood, what you went through, and their immune systems. Why couldn't they go outside, Mom? Okay, let's explore this. What is their immune system? All of a sudden, the immune system has so much relevance. My brother and sister could have died if you brought them out and they were exposed to somebody with a cold, Then it has meaning, and that's why you care.
Right.
You had mentioned earlier, even if you just learned a handful of scientific concepts really deeply and it was connected to something meaningful, you are much better off than going through the entire K-12 science program and having checked all those boxes for scientific information that the teacher needs to transfer into the child's brain.
Yes.
So did you have
It's
more?
kind of like I was just thinking, what you're saying is making me think of, if we think about all the adults we know, including ourselves, and we reflect back on our elementary, middle school, high school learning, how much of that knowledge do any of us remember? Like, do I even know or remember those lessons that I learned? It's the relationships with people and the experiences we had that were meaningful that are still with us and affecting us. Yes, graduating from high school can be really important to taking next steps, but there are a million ways to getting to graduating high school that don't include being in a K through 12 program and trying to check all the boxes. And I think what we're talking about is we can live meaningful lives as children and youth and have these wonderful, powerful experiences and fill those lives up with stories and meaning and wonderful experiences, or we can be focused on box checking. But if you're going to be focused on box checking, you're not going to have those experiences. And at the end, you kind of have an empty box. What will you have? Because none of us are retaining those things that we forced ourselves to learn through that K through 12 system.
Absolutely. And I would say that the most important thing we can give our children is a meaningful childhood. Children need meaning just as much as adults do. And it reminds me of something Helen Keller said. As my knowledge of things grew, I felt more and more the delight of the world I was in. Long before I learned to do a sum in arithmetic or describe the shape of the earth, Miss Sullivan had taught me to find beauty in the fragrant woods, in every blade of grass, and in the curves and dimples of my baby sister's hand. And I thought of your twins and how you having those twins and having Isabel there with you, that gave her meaning. The twins were part of many things, I'm sure, that gave her life meaning. She linked my earliest thoughts with nature and made me feel that birds and flowers and I were happy peers. So Miss Sullivan was focused on giving Helen Keller's life meaning first and fostering relationships with nature and people before she started teaching her arithmetic and the names of birds.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Like that's reminding me, my twins, they're 17 now, but they have always had this love of animals and like small things. They both love toddlers and babies, and they like to babysit together, and they're really cute little ones. And they love birds and squirrels and small little animals, and they have their own stuffed animal collection. Even as 17-year-olds, they still like these are real people in their worlds, and it's just this is one way I can see so many different subjects all colliding together for my twins. They have both taken several science classes in our co-op, chemistry and physics and biology, and they've learned those things and then made connections to the real world. My son especially loves he could stare outside at the birds all day long. Sometimes I have a hard time getting him do his homework for his classes because he's staring at the birds. And he's now talking about someday he wants to be an ornithologist, which is, professionally studying birds because he loves them so much. And like he read The Trumpet of the Swan and, listened to that audiobook and just connected so deeply with so much of that book and his sister too. And they both love the book Duet. I don't know if you guys have read that book. That is such a beautiful book. It's a boy who is a piano prodigy makes friends with this little bird. So it's fantasy, but sort of realistic fantasy. And this bird, Mirabelle, becomes his like partner in his piano. And the book explores music, some level of biology with the bird and relationships and all sorts of subjects where it's all over the place and wonderful. And that's another book that my kids have really connected with. And then my son, he's in a class right now that I'm teaching called The Great Conversation, and they study a topic that humans have been like debating about for eons, like what is the role of women in society? That's the unit we're currently on. And we did a previous unit on capitalism, socialism, and communism, and the differences and the debates over why that matters. And then we encourage the students at the end of the unit to produce some sort of work of their own that's their contribution to the conversation. And my son, for every one of his join the conversation where he makes his own contribution, he writes a story, and it's always about his stuffed animals, and they're in some sort of scenario related to the topic. So it's just I'm just pointing out how he's connected all these different disciplines and topics and life experiences into one thing, and it has meaning. And like he shares those stories with friends and cousins and kids that he knows, and they love them, and it's just this wonderful thread going through everything.
Beautiful. So give them a reason to care, and then they'll be hungry to learn about anything that's connected to what they care about.
Yeah. It has meaning. Like when you start with the whole, then all your learning has meaning, and you hang on to a lot more of it and apply it in other areas. It doesn't just stay in that one spot.
I love the word that you used, hunger, Angel. I recently heard a quote that like hunger is the key to success. So you have to be hungry for it, to want it, to push yourself into that action.
Yes.
And that can't happen if we're constantly trying to force feed them.
Hunger comes from what? You're not giving it to them, right? You give them just enough so that they're hungry for it, and then they want to feast on it. Whereas if you've just shoving food in their mouth, like they're not hungry for anything, right? And so got this whole metaphor going on.
Yeah, well, that's the whole metaphor of my book, actually, is feasting. And so
that's right.
I say that, you want to feast on whole foods, the idea of starting with the whole. But my argument is that what conventional schooling does, imagine eating a chocolate chip cookie divided into all its parts. Here, have a spoonful of baking soda. Here, have some butter. Here, have some sugar, some flour. Each of those individual ingredients tastes disgusting on its own.
Right.
But when you eat it in context of the whole, then it's delicious. And you want more. Maybe chocolate chip cookies aren't your thing, but you can choose another food or meal that you like.
Well, and that's what you're saying. I love that analogy. It's making me think of like baking also includes some chemical transformations. And there's something transforming about the whole when you incorporate things into a whole. They're transformed, and I feel like there's a spiritual application there too.
Well, I'm going to have to think more about that one. That a chemical... Yeah, you're not just mixing it together. It tastes very different when it's baked. Yeah.
It's kind of like what I'm thinking about, like the theater experience my kids get. It feels like there is some sort of transformation that happens in that process that produces something more like a cookie at the end rather than a set of raw ingredients.
Right.
And I think that happens internally within ourselves too. All these experiences we have, if they are connected in some meaningful way, they transform us too, rather than just being a bunch of raw things we've inserted into ourselves.
And that is really what education is that it's a becoming.
Yes.
It's not a collection It's even beyond an understanding. It changes who you are.
And it just occurred to me, another thought that's coming to mind is that
Yeah.
sometimes there is like a magic ingredient we would never think to include, and God knows, and God inserts that magic ingredient into our recipe, and it makes it even more transformational. And often that comes, I think, in limitations or challenges or things we would never choose, but they create the magic.
Wow. Very cool. Anything that came to mind, things you've seen in your older kids that are signs that you feel are the fruits of this educational approach you've taken?
My twins have profound learning disabilities, and it's been so beautiful to have homeschooled them and had that flexibility. Like they weren't even aware of their learning disabilities until much later, which was a blessing, I think. And now that they're teenagers, it is a little bit more challenging in some ways for them. And also, I'm so grateful to know we have all the time we need to work through this. Just because you're 17 and theoretically next year's your senior year of high school, that doesn't mean that has to be. And again, I'm not concerned with fitting them with a set of checkbox lessons. They need to know how to learn. And like I define that as basic literacy. You need to be able to read and write and do some basic calculating. And they're still struggling with especially like the calculating. Their dyscalculia is profound, but we're getting there. They have had so many beautiful experiences along the way, even in spite of that, and they do have a love for learning and know that it matters, not just for how to be a successful adult. They know that learning it makes life worth living and fun and meaningful, and they want to, and they have their own subjects and things that they're both passionate about and excited to do, and they know that I'm here to help them on that I'll be excited to explore whatever they want to explore as they go about that.
Well, I can vouch for that. Like, this isn't just mom's word. I'll add my word because I had Jennifer's twins in one of my online classes, or a couple of my online classes that I taught, and they were very vocal, especially your daughter was always wanting to participate in the conversation. She was one of maybe 3 kids or 3 or 4 in the group who participated the most in the conversation. She was so engaged and she really cared about it. She cared about the topics. There were no grades in this class. Like, they weren't getting points for talking. She was making connections to her life and other things going on in the world now because it was a history-based class. It seemed very obvious to me that she loves learning. There was no external pressures.
That's one of her superpowers, is the connections thing. And I think a lot of that has come from all the stories that she has consumed. She loves them and reads a ton. And even with the challenges she had in getting to the point where she could do that, but she can make a connection between anything and anything. And they're legitimate. They're not a stretch, as you experienced.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
love that she has that in her to be able to connect everything that she's experiencing and everything she's consuming and see the patterns.
So beautiful. Way to go, Mama.
Thank you.
You achieved love of learning. I think it's so easy, especially in our world. It's just so easy to kill that
Yeah.
in a child.
A world of information. It's not like all the information's there. And so that makes it even harder, I think, to love learning when it's so easily accessible. So creating that hunger, I think, is a greater and harder skill.
And what's sad, I think, and true, is that developing a love of learning is what we were born to do. It's innate in us. And so the fact that we have gotten so good at stamping it out of people is scary. I don't know if you guys read Frog and Toad stories with your children, but one of my favorite
I love
is,
them.
the garden.
Yes. Yes. I quote that in my book.
Yes. Okay. I love that. That story, I feel like that is developing a love of learning. It's
tell it. Yeah. Just tell us briefly the part that's relevant.
So I believe Toad wants to build a garden, and Frog says, "Oh, you totally can do it. Here's what to do." And he's teaching Toad, basically, it's really simple. You need a good environment for your seeds to grow. They need the soil, they need water, and they need sunshine. That's it. And it's a good environment. And Toad's like, okay. And he does it. And then he's like staring over his garden, waiting for seeds to sprout. And it's not happening. And he's like, Frog, what's wrong? It's not working. And so Toad starts experimenting and tries a million things. He sings to his seeds. He yells at them. I can't remember all the things he does. He does all sorts of silly things trying to get these seeds to grow. And
sprout, seeds, sprout.
Yeah. And Frog keeps telling him it'll happen. This is that whole trust the process thing. Like it's going to happen, but calm down. Just wait. And eventually the seeds do sprout. And it isn't because of any of the crazy things that Toad did. It's because Toad did the few simple things that were important, which was a good environment. And I think that's for our children. What we need is a really good environment, and love of learning will naturally develop. And that environment is pretty simple. It's becoming more complicated in this day and age. We have to block out more things, but they really just need a very simple environment, and love of learning will develop naturally.
If this podcast was helpful for you, please leave us a review and share with a friend.
Until next time, start with stories and everything else will follow.
You can learn more about our other education projects at angelselda.com and wonderwelllearning.com.